Hi there, Glocal citizens. Welcome back to the podcast that inspires a borderless mindset around manifesting a new world. I am your host, Florence Adu, coming to you from a lovely terrace in the Northridge section of Accra. It's really a lovely, quiet neighborhood. It's one of those hidden around the corner because it's kind of between the seat of power and the seat of commerce. So, there's always those little secret-ish locations, but I love it because it's it's tree lined. This is a place where there's still trees in Accra, and we don't have so much of the time anymore. So I'm grateful for this lovely background for my interview today, which is set to be a real interesting conversation. I'm so excited about how this has come about, and it's really paving the way for exactly the kinds of activities and activations that the podcast is really about. So let me get to his bio and then our conversation, and you'll see why. He is founder of Damalie Innovation Holdings Group, which invests in and builds companies in health tech, sports value chain, gaming and family entertainment, urban infrastructure and urban development, and trade and embedded finance, climate resilience as well. Previously, he was the co-founder of Inclusive Innovations, Inc., which developed the Approve API app, which is a product making it easier for financial services to verify individuals and businesses all over Africa. In 2023, Approve was acquired by Smile ID. Woo! We love acquisitions. We love the exit, the making and the exit. That means we're creating value that is globally recognized. Okay, so as a fintech industry influencer, he is among Untapt's top 23 fintech influencers to follow on X, that is formerly Twitter, for those that may not know. He is a chapter lead of Next Money, the global thought leader community for stakeholders within the financial services and technology ecosystem. He organizes events, meetups, and conferences that create opportunities for stakeholders to discuss current trends, explore opportunities through networking, and influence policy in the financial services ecosystem. He also has experience consulting for fintech startups and new market entrants into West Africa, working closely with fintech innovation programs, accelerators, and investors, as well as financial inclusion research institutions. Paul Kwesi Damalie,
hello.
Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Florence. Thank you for having me. Hello to your audience as well.
Yes, awesomeness. Okay, so let's get started.
All right.
First up, where are you from? Where are you local? And what is your craft?
Right. So I'm an indigen of Ghana. I'm from the eastern coast of Ghana, from a town called Keta. It's a beach city, but I mostly grew up in Accra, Tema, and a town called Ekropong in the eastern region of Ghana. So I've sort of had a bit of overview of the country, beachside, city life, in the forest, mountain zone. It's quite rounded, well-rounded, exposed to Ghana in that sense. And so, yes, that is me as a Ghanaian. And if you ask me who I am, I'm a very curious person, a creative, imaginative person. I like to solve problems. I like to see people have better lives. And so instinctively, I'm always trying to solve problems. From an entrepreneurial point of view, I'm currently the founder of a company called Damalie Innovations Group, DIH Group. And essentially what we do is to invest and build companies in the global south. Our goal is to create prosperity in the global south. We have very specific industries that we sort of invest or build solutions in, right? And so first of mind really is public infrastructure and urban planning. Those are very important spaces for us. Healthcare and biotech also really interesting spaces. We've made some investments in there. We also have deep tech in general, AI, ML, deep tech. My previous company was largely an ML, AI, computer vision company. And so, yes, machine learning, artificial intelligence. Deep tech really has to do with really complex engineering, solving complex engineering problems. So from hardware through to systems design, rocket science, whatever, right? Those are all really complex engineering challenges Then, because of my background in finance, also trade finance, embedded fintech are really interesting spaces for me. Then, climate resilience. I really do care about the environment, and so innovations within that space. It's either we are building a company ourselves or investing in someone who's building an innovation in that space. Then sports, gaming, and family entertainment also very interesting spaces for us.
So a little bit of media.
Yes, exactly. Media also really
Yeah.
part of it. So yeah, that's really like my involvement, and these are the spaces that fascinate me and keep me going, basically.
And it's so interesting because all of that is the cradle of humanity to a large degree,
Absolutely.
right? So you're really looking at from the cradle to growth and to
Yes.
the living of existence. And so within all of that, you first mentioned you're curious, you're creative. So what would you say is your unique craft? Like, what is it that is the thing that you do and do with flow?
Right. I think that because of my different kinds of influences, right? Growing up really young, my first love was art. So I'm really good at drawing. I used to make money in school drawing for people doing their science projects, comics, and all of that. So that was my first love. Then obviously I grew into math, science, engineering. Also, all of that came, in there. And then obviously when I went to, I did my undergrad business finance. So these multiple backgrounds really allowed me to like think on a systems level and then be able to like create. If I have an idea, I would sketch, or like I would sketch a whole flow. I would say, this is how the problem looks like. This is what, the user, and this is the challenge he has. How do you pinpoint the problem from a first principles point of view? And then use that to actually begin to think of solutions. So this is the thing that I really do well. I think that the other thing I know how to do is to also connect people, find talent, and then be able to work with them to like really achieve the goal. So these are the things that naturally do come to me.
Okay. Makes sense. I can see it.
Right.
Okay. So you mentioned, art as your first passion, your first love, and then moving into the science of things. So enter entrepreneurship.
Right.
We were talking a little bit before starting our conversation and how you how you approach training.
Yes.
And then what drove you to become the entrepreneur that you are?
Right. So after high school, I told my dad that one of the things I actually want to do is to do an internship with my uncle at an engineering workshop. If you are familiar with car fitting shops in Ghana, they are very rudimentary. They are not really organized. My dad didn't like the idea at all. So now I had to start think of like, what do I do? I'd read the newspapers a lot actually at that age. So I was 18 years old around this time. And so one day I saw an ad. There was this insurance firm that was basically advertising a role for insurance salesperson. I was like, that's interesting. I don't want to stay home for the entire year. Let me do something. The minimum requirement was an HND, higher national diploma. So that's like it's a diploma program.
Sure.
Before you even get a degree. Yeah. And I was like, but I just have a high school certificate. So how am I I was like, let me just try my luck. That was just what I did. So I put in an application actually. Next week I was called. The manager of the regional office called me and he was like, hey, are you interested in doing this? And I was like, yes, why not? If it's something I'll learn from, yeah. They invited me. I went. I was the youngest person over there. Everybody was like a degree holder on HND. And essentially, I didn't know anything about insurance. So for 2 weeks, we went through a training, basically onboarding us. They taught us how to make sales pitches. If you know insurance is one of the most difficult products to ever sell, especially in Africa, really, if you do not see the immediate value, right? So I had to learn a lot. throughout the process, typically this is how my week would work, right? I would go with some teammates to, say, a government office, and then we'll make sales pitches, right? And then if we're lucky, we'll probably get like 10 people, and then get them to fill the forms and bring them, back. The thing I realized quickly was that it was always gonna be a hard sell. So I needed to start to think of how to make my quota. I was being paid on commission. So if you're not making sales, then you're not making money. So around that time, I really got interested in just basically personal development. There was this individuals, motivational speakers, Albert and Comfort Okran. They had just launched a book on personal financial development, and I actually rang them and I was like, hey, guys, I have this idea. I think I can sell your books, but it will help me to be able to also sell my products. So why don't you send me some of your books? I don't have money, but just send me. And I can. And if you don't trust me, there's a contact working at a fuel station, the manager of the fuel station in Koforidua. Just send the books to him. Every week I'll go for the books and I'll go and sell them. They were like, oh, sounds cool. So my plan was that, well, insurance is a financial product. So maybe I shouldn't lead with selling insurance. What I should lead with is selling the book. Yes, and they would be interested. So I started doing that, and yeah, interestingly, it picked up. And so typically my sales pitch would be, read this. It will help you make some decisions so that you're not thinking that I am trying to sell to you, but you're making the decision yourself, right? And yeah, it worked really. So after let's say a month or two, I'll get a call and be like, hey, Paul, you know what? I actually want to take a look at that insurance product you talked about. So that was like really my first foray into really trying to be, entrepreneurial in that sense. Also part of, having to sell, I was literally walking all over Florida. Part of that, during my downtime, I would go to internet cafes. I didn't have like a computer or internet access at home at that time. And so what I spent time doing on YouTube especially was watching documentaries. I'd watch 60 Minutes, I'd watch Bloomberg, Forbes, and those days were like the very early days when people like Mark Zuckerberg and Amazon's founders, like they did documentaries of their lives and stuff. So it really inspired me because growing up, I always wanted to be like a scientist or an inventor. But like, this was so different. It was like a whole new world. I got into the whole world of tech, trying to learn how to teach myself how to code, and then having learned about them, I realized that one thing that was so key about their lives was the fact that they had entrepreneurial skills. So I was like, I'd applied for agricultural engineering because, when you're waiting that gap, yeah, that's what I was going to study. I actually ended up convincing my dad that, that I want to scratch that. Let me focus on banking and finance because I think, he wasn't sure at first. He was like, but you're a science student, engineering, so I'm not sure if you can do that. But the good thing about I studied agricultural science in Accra Academy. And it is the most interdisciplinary high school course you'd ever do. You do economics, you do biology, you do physics, you do chemistry, you do economics, farm management, which is really business. So I told him all this, and like, I would always hold my own with business students, in the same way I would hold my own with science students. So I told him that this is what I think I want to do. And he was like, okay, let's find a university for you because I don't think the public universities would be flexible enough, Yeah. And really, this was my beginning of foray into the world of finance, business, entrepreneurship.
Okay.
Really. So
wow. I love that story.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's a really neat story. Especially the idea that you understood psychology so early on. You said you're 18.
Yes.
And already you had understood, okay, I have to figure out a way to change people's minds and mindsets. And that's really the key.
Yes, I think a lot of it really also came from my dad and mom. My dad, he was throughout his life, before he worked with the IRS then, it was called the IRS, Internal Revenue Services, now GRA. So he was a tax officer, a tax administrator for the region. He worked as an English and history professor. So, and he had traveled all across Africa. At home, he had like this stack of books and all of that. So I'd read a lot of those things. So I was really exposed in terms of like different literature and all of that, And my dad was also a very good conversationalist. So he would always engage you because he wants to share his experiences. He would tell you his stories, especially when he was living in Nigeria and Liberia. He would tell us all his stories and all of that. So all of that really goes a long way to shaping you. My mom also, like a serial entrepreneur. She used to own an agricultural poultry farm. She used to own a hairdressing salon. So it's like all these exposures and experiences just add to how you develop, really.
Yeah, absolutely. So then you study, you climb various ladders, and you have this opportunity. Being exposed, having your father travel a lot, you had a choice and have a choice of where to be. So this is where I ask why the where. So how did you come to be living, working, and playing here in Ghana as opposed to anywhere in the world?
Well, that's an interesting question. Very good one. At the time, there were a bunch of things happening in Ghana. Private education was really booming.
Yeah.
Private university, Ashesi, Radford University, which I attended. Central University, a bunch of them were booming. And there was just a general trajectory that these universities were offering better offerings than, the public universities. My little experience in public education, high school, having interacted with people in universities, I really knew that I wouldn't enjoy my time in the public universities just because emphasis on rote memorization, not enough practical education. The founder of Radford is a seasoned entrepreneur both in Ghana and the US. And so when I looked at their website, the curriculum they were offering, it was very practical, very entrepreneurial. And I honestly don't regret having ever to go to that university because it also set me up perfectly. I was very much interested in tech. And so when I did the research, I realized that Radford University was in East Legon. And it was literally a walking distance from the Meltwater Entrepreneurial School of Technology, which I had been also monitoring. So I was like, this is actually perfect for me. And it's not so far from University of Ghana, so Legon. So I'm just within the same vicinity, community. So I might as well just take it, Also availability of resources. So I was just like, okay, yes. My dad was like, yeah, this is what you want to do, let's do it. Let's go enroll you there. And I think it was probably the perfect situation for me.
So you decide, and being a university is kind of what grounded you in Ghana, is kind of what but you have lived outside and come back.
Yes. Well, mostly it's because of work, entrepreneurship that has taken me out. Yeah. But I grew up mostly in Ghana, but I had an eye to the world.
Sure.
Growing up, I used to watch a lot of innovation programs on TV. Kids are tough. Today don't have those things.
That's why I'm here.
Yes. There used to be this German program, and they would literally explain how a machine works, the biology behind products. And it used to be my favorite program. So I had a lot of exposure, how things work, science, play. It was really curated, and my interests were all towards, when it comes to the social sciences, then it's history and all of that. When it's the science, math, engineering, those things. So those things really exposed me in that sense to the world. And then obviously also through my entrepreneurship endeavors, had the opportunity to go to the US, California, San Francisco, had the opportunity to be in the UK, Europe, and a lot of African countries. So yeah, that is how my global exposure happened.
Sure. So let's talk about the process of building a business that you can exit, right? So tell us about what Approve was about, and then how you knew it was time.
It's interesting because I think that what Approve turned out to be was a culmination of also all my exposures and experiences, particularly starting from that insurance business that I had, right? So essentially, what Approve is it's an infrastructure. It connects to software infrastructure, basically connects to multiple data sets. So data sets including credit data bureau, government ID data, business registry, and then we use basically a machine learning orchestration to make sense of the data and build relationships with the data. And then much later on, we also built some computer vision infrastructure on top of it to allow financial services to be able to remotely onboard their customers. So their customers wouldn't have to walk into the banking hall to do that. So through their mobile app or web app, they integrate our infrastructure and then they're able to do that. And we're able to grow that across 8 African countries before we got acquired.
Before you move forward, machine learning is one of those mystical kinds of spaces for those who aren't techies.
Yes.
So in the context of what, the regular layman might understand about technology,
Yes.
explain what machine learning
Yes.
enables.
Yes. So if you pick a machine, like a typical computer, the computer it's not sentient, right? It's not a living being of its own. So you have to give it instructions. And the only way machines understand instructions is through what we call it zeros and ones, right? Computer language, basically. And so you use programs, right? Programming software to give these instructions to sort of like do a certain specific task you want it to do. And so when you say machine learning, it's literally means I am teaching the machine to do very specific tasks over time, right? And that's the kind of software we built to teach it how to do things like, when you identify someone's face, black person's face, basically match it to this name, match it to an age, match it to a driver's license, a passport, right? And so basically then it begins to build relationships with data sets. And that is usually what financial institutions need to be able to confirm that, one, you are truly who you say you are. And also by regulation, the central banks require them to do that, and also for them to protect themselves and prevent fraud, to know that they are not funding or doing business with someone in terrorism or anything of that kind of. So it was very critical infrastructure for the financial services, and machine learning was that, I would say, superpower. And it's a subset of artificial intelligence, it's that superpower that helped us to figure out a lot of the problems that exist. Yeah.
So then you were going into the
Yes.
space. Yes.
And so essentially what that allowed us to do was now to really be able to work. Well, let me put it this way. The beginnings of Approve was a very interesting experience because, first of all, being exposed to insurance meant that I was always doing something we call KYC within the financial services industry. Know your customer. Know your customer basically is a financial services term that means that if you engage someone to open a bank account, an insurance account, whatever it is, you have to know who they are. So you have a form, they fill the data about themselves, etc., etc. So as a salesperson in insurance, I did a lot of that, right? And of course, sometimes my clients would be rejected, but it was always painful.
Right.
And so I tell you the story. Basically, a typical week, let's say have 10 sales. I've made 10 sales. I go back to the office and I'm so excited because I'm going to make commissions on all of this. And they'll take the data to the head office, and the head office comes back and say, "We're sorry, Paul. We can only onboard 5 people." I'm like, "Why? Do you know what it took me to do? I was literally walking under the sun for hours and hours to close these deals, and you can only onboard 5.
Yeah.
That's so disappointing." But at that time, I didn't know that it was because of the challenges of not being able to verify these identities. So that was my first foray into the problem, but I had no connection to it, right? And so, again, similar events during my undergrad, I had the opportunity to do a fellowship with EcoBank Group, and it's like a fellowship program the way they revolve you around the entire bank, the group, and so you get to see different departments of the investment banking, retail banking. So I did all of that.
Yeah.
Again, same issues with, closing accounts. I did some relationship management and it was the same problem. So we're talking 2011, 2012, 2013.
Sure.
Right. And so it just became a recurring theme anytime I was working within financial services, especially. And so eventually, when I went to MEST and I finished MEST, I started a company called Loystar, which had nothing to do with, KYC and approve. It was more on loyalty. We built a solution to help small businesses to retain their customers, right? I left after 9, 10 months because I thought we could do bigger things, but we're not doing it. And so I decided to focus on something else. Throughout my period in MEST, I used to organize these events, basically Fintech events. At that time, Fintech was a very new concept. I partnered with a Singaporean Australian firm or organization called Nextbank and basically took their templates for organizing events. I reached out to folks within my network in banking, obviously brought together engineers, software folks, and put them in the same room, and we discussed how can we use software to solve problems in financial services. And it started really growing. People were like, what is this new thing that these guys are organizing? So it brought in a lot of people, from regulators to people involved in financial inclusion, like the World Bank, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And so it was just like a series of things happening, right? And so I'm exposed to all these people, but still at that time I didn't know what I wanted to do after leaving Loystar. And so I started doing interviews. I was like, maybe I should do something in insurance because I used to work in insurance, right? And so essentially what I did was I did a lot of interviews, spoke to folks in insurance, even bank assurance. I spoke to them, and concurrently, the first issue they all had was verifying customers. So it basically became the theme, and then I started forming a hypothesis around it, started recollecting all my experiences and putting that together to start to try to find a solution or figure out how to solve the problem,
So what was your hypothesis?
Well, the thing was that, a lot of the verifications that were done at that time, there used to be a database, right, and that you could access, but it wasn't widely accessible, and it was a very manual process of accessing it. So they did something they called batch verification. So you would send like 100 names, and you would basically enter. You'd have people enter yes, and then it has to return a result to match a yes or a no match. It was so inefficient, and at that time, mobile money was taking off. People were building digital financial services and solutions. So they needed a way to be able to do verifications remotely. They didn't need to have their customers come into their physical locations. And so I was like, this is actually it. If we can build some kind of a solution that will connect to a database, and then these digital financial solutions will be able to have access to what we call an API. An API is like software infrastructure that communicates with databases to and fro, right? Then what that means is that they can now build solutions and remotely onboard people without having to spend time, going through that whole manual process. So that was essentially our hypothesis. And we're like, okay, to solve that, we will need to get access to government data. And that is where my headaches began.
Yes, of course.
Yes. The approved journey was incredibly tough.
Yeah.
It was probably one of the most difficult things I've ever done in my life.
Particularly because you were in 8 countries.
Yes, eventually we grew into 8 countries. When we started, this was 2017, December, entering into 2018. And so I spent like the last quarter of 2017 doing a lot of the interviews, gathering information and research and all of that. we started doing some interviews with governments. And at the time, my co-founder, well, he was the same. He's basically my friend back in university. We built businesses together. We did consulting. We even built Papa's Pizza's first accounting software. Papa's Pizza is one of Ghana's biggest pizza chains, right? And so he was a guy I knew that, we built things together. But he was a very smallish and diminutive guy. He looked like a 13-year-old. I also was young. I was 24 years old. So literally would walk into offices. If not for the fact that I had been doing these fintech events, I didn't have access.
Right, because you look so young.
Yes. Yeah. Look so young.
Yeah.
Like, do you have these connections? You don't have those appointments.
Sure.
But we managed to get, some of our contacts we spoke to in the banks were like, oh, speak to these guys. They have access to some database, driver's license, passport. So we'll get these meetings and we'll get into the meetings and these government people will be like, why you guys, you are so young. Go and look for a job to do. Who told you that you can do something like this? No one will give you access. Just go and look for a job to do. Are you looking for a job?
Yeah.
This is the thing that would always get.
So they just thought you were looking for jobs.
Yes, really. Yeah, that experience also made us start to think about what our options are, right? Mm-hmm. And so we decided that, you know what, we will build the infrastructure first. We will build it in such a way that it would be modular, easy, like when I say modular, like Lego, plug and play. So let's build the aspects that are in our control. So like the API, the database infrastructure, so that wherever we go, even if it's not Ghana, but we're not thinking on that level yet. We're thinking more like, okay, if we can't get the national ID, maybe we can speak to the driver's license and the passports and get those ones. We can start to plug in data. Even when we speak to banks can plug in their data. And so, yeah, it was very grand. We thought that we could do it because we had really great technology. But the reality was that at the time, I don't think Ghana was that advanced. And a lot of people in the industry were exposed to such thinking. Who are you to come and access for our data? Like, do you know you are posing a security risk to? I can lose my job, so forget it. It sounds interesting, but I'm not going to do anything with you. So yeah, obviously there was a lot of inertia. Like taking off in Ghana was really difficult. It wasn't easy. We're actually really thinking that maybe to just be a side project we'll do and that's it. Maybe whoever would want the APIs we've built, we just give it to them. We even built demo apps to begin to show them that this is eventually what we are thinking. So if you have a banking app, then you could use it like this. Your customer could take a picture of their face, take a picture of their ID. It passes through our system. We verify at your back end, you can approve, and then your customer can be onboarded. They don't have to walk into your banking hall. Not many banks had like banking apps at that time.
Exactly, yeah.
And it wasn't widespread. So,
like even then, there was a tension between the banks and Momo.
Yes, exactly.
They were really like, what's going on? We're not. There was a lot of fear in that space. And so who were your first customers?
So the way it went was this. We eventually had, in Ghana, we had fintechs, right? Folks just building out things as our first customers. But we didn't have them as paying customers. We had them as what we call proof of concept customers, right, at that time. And then what we ended up doing was that, again, I told you I was organizing these fintech events. I did some consultation for Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation because they had grants and funds for financial inclusion, and they had various countries where they were interested in finding out who is doing something within that space, right? So they had reached out to me and I did some consultation mapping out the fintech and the tech landscape for them. And so they were really impressed with the work. Like if you go online, you will still see that work is there. And they were like, okay, Paul, this sounds interesting because there aren't many people like this. We spoke to a lot of the banks. Maybe the closest who could give us a sense of what you've done were the mobile money folks. Mm-hmm. But because of the unique position I found myself in, I was with the tech folks, I was with the banks, I was the Momo guys. So I knew all of them because I was organizing all these events. So I could really map out the entire ecosystem. So they were like, what are you doing? And I was like, well, there's this problem I've been trying to solve because, of my experiences in financial services. It has to do with KYC and onboarding. And I was like, oh, that is one of our teams, because our thesis is that if you can enable Africans to get access to IDs and verify them, then it's the beginning of financial inclusion. They can easily open bank accounts and start to access financial services. So they were like, would you be interested in coming to Sri Lanka to come pitch your ideas to Bill Gates? I was like, who?
Of course, why not?
Bill Gates? It was interesting because I was like, well, this thing was just an idea. We just like started it, and now, this is how far. So yeah, sometime May, June, July, we went to Sri Lanka. We got invited. We pitched with some other African and Asian startups, American startups as well. And we're pitching for and vying for a $50,000 grant from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation through a program called the DFS Lab, Digital Financial Services Lab, run by a research firm called Caribou Digital. Dr. Jake Kendall and Stephen Denk, they ran that program, and wow, that was my first time traveling to Asia. The jet lag, the time difference, man, it was very intense because immediately we landed, we had to start preparing,
wow, yeah.
doing, various prototyping work. Man, we did it late into the evening, preparing our thesis and pitch. I was dozing off. It was just so funny. But yeah, it was worth the time. Eventually, we pitched. I was very nervous, but we pitched. And we had our first grant funding of $50,000. The whole thing became very real to us, and they even started mooting their idea because some of the other startups were solving things in credit, lending, insurance, etc. And they were all like, oh, can you build this for us? We're in Kenya. Can you build this for us? We're in South Africa. Can you build this? So actually, the folks at DFS Lab started mooting and encouraging us that think of this infrastructure as Pan-African, because then what you would be doing is to build something that could be modular, you can easily plug. So then it started like, oh yeah, if we are having problems in Ghana, then we should go somewhere else where it would be accepted, right? So yeah, that's what we did actually. We ended up in South Africa, went for an accelerator program there, and started out, got access to data in South Africa. We eventually went to Kenya, also got access to some data in Kenya.
So Ghana wasn't first.
No.
Exactly.
No. Yes. So we actually served Ghanaian startups that were looking Pan-African.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
Then eventually we got access to data, some data in Ghana through some partnerships. Then Nigeria, which was like the defining moment for the business, because Nigeria is a very demanding and big market, right? And then throughout that process, we had exposure also to San Francisco. Google were the first, probably the smallest startup to get into Google's first program for startups. It's called Google for Startups. And it was a global cohort. And so spent some time in Mountain View, California, basically. And that was also a turning point, because at that time, my engineering team was beginning to really be conversant with AI and machine learning. And so going to Google, we're paired with engineers. We met Peter Novick, one of the fathers of AI. We're paired with product engineers and, various companies similar to us. And we learned a lot from them, and really this accelerated the way we built our infrastructure. We had mentors from Google supporting us and free resources from Google, which accelerated our capabilities and, helped us to build locally relevant infrastructure with locally relevant solutions with global infrastructure. And so, yeah, that really was how things started picking up. And then throughout, it was still a bit of a slow process. we had the folks from Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. They would go to meetings with us in various African countries just to support us.
Yeah, that's what they, as a foundation.
Exactly. And so those things were very good for us. They helped us think through how to position ourselves in front of banks, think about our security. We started doing our ISO certifications and all of that kind of stuff. So yeah, that was really like how catalytic that whole experience was to get us to, or even basically where we got to.
Yeah. So in full operations, you spent about how many years?
In total, 6 years really. But like really, as the business taking off, 4 years. Yeah, because obviously it takes you to find product market fit 2.5, 3 years. You'd literally spend. We really became a big deal during the pandemic. We had growing pains during the pandemic.
I can imagine.
Yeah, because what happened, all of a sudden, everybody is at home.
Yeah.
So, like, how do we still continue opening bank accounts?
Sure. Yeah.
We signed on a client in Nigeria in less than 4 weeks, a bank client.
Mm-hmm.
It was mad because we had never done anything like that at that pace.
Wow.
And banks are notoriously known to take forever to close. So how are you even going to achieve that?
They were like, look, we got to keep staying business.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So,
wow.
That is really where we took off. We had product market fit, but it also brought to us very interesting challenges because we had a small team. We had to recruit. It also meant that we now had to, because prior to this, we had multiple grant funding. Yeah, but now we had to look at equity capital, raising from investors. So, we went through that process also, a very painful, slow process at the time. But it was worth it. We learned a lot of things, how to engage investors, and we raised some equity capital also. So in all, between grants and equity, we raised almost $1 million.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Not bad for an accidental
yes.
Fintech entrepreneur.
Yes.
That's going to do it for part 1 of my conversation with Paul Damalie. Be sure to come back next week for part 2 of our conversation, where Paul tells us all about the Keita Makerspace, his new next and now. As always, you can catch us with new episodes at glocalcitizenspod.com or wherever you get your podcasts. Please like, share, subscribe, and leave us a review. We are still looking for up to a 5-star review from 100 listeners in 2024. So do us a favor and leave us a review. And until next time, bye for now.